Star Citizen's 4.0 update is potentially right around the corner. It's been in testing on the game's public test servers for a few weeks now, but CIG are expanding the test to more players and even starting to market more publicly their upcoming content. And considering that they promised this content by the end of the year for like the third time now, it seems likely that the devs are laser focused on hitting that deadline. But what is 4.0 like in its current state on the test servers? Is it even ready for launch, and what have the devs cut to hit their deadline? Let's dive deeper. So the TLDR on Star Citizen 4.0 is that it's Star Citizen's next major content update. Much of what it's supposed to offer was specified at last year's CitizenCon. It's intended to introduce server meshing to the game, a system that transitions players seamlessly across servers with no loading or obvious transitions. It's also introducing the game's second ever solar system, which is a pretty big deal. That system is Pyro, a mostly lawless place that's as much of a hive of scum and villainy as it is a promising new frontier for Star Citizen. And Pyro certainly is the star of the show for at least the average player, as it means new content. But the underlying tech and new gameplay systems it was intended to introduce are way more important in the long term. These would be things like server meshing, engineering gameplay, life support systems, fire mechanics, solar flares, power charging and draining, and completely reworked transit systems. Unfortunately, all of those features, aside from server meshing, have been cut from the current build of 4.0 that is currently in testing. And if you are looking forward to some of those features, then obviously seeing them cut is a pretty big disappointment. Still, looking at the update on a purely technical level, it is an absolute milestone for the game. Server meshing will massively increase the potential player count per instance. CIG have been pushing those player limits up to about 1,000 players, which was about as stable as a house of cards. But in theory, server meshing will give the game a lot more resilience against server crashes, which have been tested and they do work, although the experience can vary depending on the servers that day. And 4.0's implementation of server meshing is static server meshing. In the future, the game will upgrade to dynamic server meshing that will break the server regions down even further and let them focus their resources more specifically where they're needed. And in theory, this will allow for things like massive fleet battles and just far better overall server performance. So getting even the static version of this server meshing up and running is pretty exciting for the fans. Truly, the entire premise of this game hinges on server meshing working, and not just working, but working flawlessly without a hitch. And that's been a big holdup for a lot of fans who are looking at it and going, this seems too technically challenging. 4.0 is going to represent a major milestone there, assuming that it is stable and enjoyable to play. And when it comes to the performance right now in testing, well, it's a bit of a mixed bag. My time on the test servers has been smooth-ish sailing, and that's of course within the context of Star Citizen's smooth gameplay, which is generally a lot buggier and glitchier than, say, your average multiplayer gameplay. That said, over the past few days, elevators mostly worked, selecting missions seemed to be okay, everything seemed to be pretty stable, except when it wasn't. One time I logged in and there was just no NPCs in the station at all. While exploring one of the new contested zones, which are basically these Tarkov-style arenas, I had several instances of the game or server, whatever it was, just freezing for a split second, which nearly got me killed. And there's been a lot of concern that pushing this patch out this year just to say that they did it in 2024 is going to leave the game in a worse state without any good rollback options for quite a while. The ball is most certainly in CIG's court, and we're just waiting to see if this patch is going live this year or if they're going to hold it for a little while longer. Now, when it comes to Pyro, the second system in the game, as much as I can get cynical about Star Citizen and its lofty goals, the beauty and scale of this world always brings me back in, and Pyro is pushing that envelope even further. Stanton, or small slices of Stanton, have been the only home for Star Citizen players that we could explore for like about a decade, really. So finally getting to inhabit a new solar system has been a long time coming for the player base. And frankly, CRG are delivering the goods. Every planet in Pyro feels different from anything we've ever seen in Stanton. It's more lawless lawless nature and Wild West approach to planetary settlements gives it a very different feel in terms of the gameplay. Instead of descending into these massively futuristic bunkers and cities, you'll be stalking through surface bases that look like they were pulled in the game from a backlot of a Star Wars production. The stations in Pyro in particular have been designed with a level of fidelity and grime that's just insane. Even something as simple as the elevator doors have all these exposed parts that move realistically. Everywhere you look, there's just something really cool to see. And it's clear the level designers have been taking notes about what does and doesn't work well in Stanton. These stations tend to be much easier to navigate with clearly labeled signage, and it's easy to get around even without the use of your minimap. And then of course there's the planets. These worlds truly look alien from orbit. As I orbited the planet Bloom and came around to its daylight side, my jaw just dropped, and it was one of those oh my god moments just looking at how beautiful a game can actually be. And now the game features a photo mode for cloud rendering that's almost entirely free of artifacts while supporting proper volumetrics and light interaction. Now, once I descended to the surface, things felt a little less special since these planets are massive, close to the size of real planets, so most of the space on them is pretty empty. That will eventually change in the future. They did a pretty deep dive at CitizenCon talking about populating planets with like thousands of settlements and all that kind of stuff, but for the time being, if you just start walking around or pinging on your scanner, you're not necessarily going to find anything of interest. Now, of course, there's a whole new set of mission givers and things to do. For the most part, though, the missions seem kind of like rinse and repeat of what we had in Stanton, just in a new area, which I guess you could kind of say that about most MMO games. It's just more apparent considering Star Citizen hasn't totally hit their stride with some of the deeper, more complex mission options out there. That said, there are brand new activities thanks to the lawless nature of this place, and one of the major highlights for me are new areas called contested zones found in Pyro space stations. These are very complex, interconnected arenas made of multiple floors and rooms that are basically like a mini Tarkov experience with full-on PvP and PvE combat. You don't have to shoot other players on site, but all the NPCs will, and it's going to take some convincing to get other players to join your side rather than just kill you. The main goal is to find fuses that lets you power up doors and tokens that let you progress as deep as you want to into the zone for better loot. And there's even rooms in these areas that give out some pretty big rewards like ship components. So it'll probably be worth doing them if you're at least decent at FPS combat and want to fast track some of the better gear for your ship. And I found them really fun, at least when the server could actually keep up with it and the fuses were interactable. There was one point where I needed 2 fuses to progress through a room, and the second one I found was just floating in space and was uninteractable, literally breaking the progression of the mission. It'll be interesting to see if they can increase the loot value here enough to make it a really highly contested area. It does seem like camping and cheesy gameplay could be very effective here, like it is in other extraction shooters, so I'll be very curious to see how these arenas evolve once they retain some actual value. I will say that for the most part while I was playing, the NPCs seem to be a lot more responsive. Usually when I die in a NPC firefight, it's due to some weird desync stuff, invisible NPCs, characters teleporting around and damage dumping in one frame, just stuff that feels janky, but this time around I felt like I was actually just losing because the NPCs were performing well. CIG's been talking up their AI for quite a while, they just haven't had the server stability to really back it up, so in the rare occasion that it seems to be running well, they are quite challenging. Now, aside from these arenas, the devs are supposed to be working on a series of missions that are going to take players all around the solar system and explore the cool points of interest, but those are going to be something that we experience further down the line. There's also a pretty substantial quality of life improvement that's coming with this update. Instead of having to spawn in a hab area for a space station or one of the main landing zones, you can now spawn directly into your hangar. This is a massive deal, especially for players that don't have a med bay in their ship or haven't set their spawn point to a station yet. Getting from your hab to your hangar could require an entire train ride that takes minutes and minutes, and it's just a huge detriment to getting into the game and getting stuff done. Being able to spawn directly in your hangar, hop into your spaceship, and just get on with the game is going to be such a pacing improvement to Star Citizen, a game that's been intentionally slowing itself down with all kinds of hands-on features for everything. This is going to be a step in the right direction, and I think it's going to have a huge impact on just my personal enjoyment of logging on and doing something. They've also increased the cargo backpack space by 50%, which is great. Finally, some decisions being made at CIG that are making the game more accessible, quicker to get into, less frustrating. I'm all for this kind of decision making. Now, I will say my time spent in 4.0 for the past several days has really renewed my optimism about Star Citizen. Last year, CIG's momentum was in full swing at the end of CitizenCon, and that 2024 was going to be a watershed year for the game, but it really turned into a lot of delays and feature rollouts that didn't really add any gameplay. But finally being able to explore a more stable, more fleshed out Pyro has been a breath of fresh air. Fingers crossed that the server meshing tests are going to hold up and be good for the game in the long run. It's so hard to know if you just jumped on and had a good session or if this is an indicator of how it's going to be in the long run, but I had a pretty good time with it overall. But once this content gets into the larger player base and we can test it more, refine it more, optimize it more, I think that will be the start of Star Citizen actually becoming a more stable, more enjoyable platforming game to play. That's my hopes anyway. I've been enjoying it. What do you guys think about this? It's a huge amount of content that's going to drop potentially in the very near future. Is this going to get you back into the game? Have you been playing the game for a long time and this is just icing on the cake? If you never played before and you're thinking about it now, let me know in the comments. I'd be very curious to hear. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop me a like, subscribe for more content like it, and ding that notification bell. Up next, check out this video exploring Star Citizen's brand new mega-sized warship. It's pretty impressive. You don't want to miss it. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.